Glass clinked against marble sharp and final. Before the amber liquid could touch his lips, a slender hand darted across the mahogany bar, seamlessly swapping the baccarat crystal tumbler for another. No words were exchanged, just a fleeting, terrified glance from a waitress with bruised knuckles and a silver tray tucked under her arm. Dominic Rossi, a man who had survived 3 assassination attempts before his 30th birthday, froze. He didn't look at the new drink. He looked at the man across the table who was suddenly sweating, and then at the girl disappearing into the kitchen. He knew instantly she had just saved his life. Laura was the kind of establishment that didn't bother with a sign. Tucked away in a brutalist concrete building just off Chicago's Magnificent Mile, it existed exclusively for the city's untouchables billionaires, corrupt aldermen, and men who orchestrated violence with the flick of a diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe. The air inside was thick with the scent of Tom Ford Outwood expensive Cuban cigars and the metallic tang of ruthless ambition. Olivia Bennett hated every square inch of it. She stood by the service station, adjusting the stiff collar of her black uniform. Her feet ached a dull throb that traveled up her calves, a reminder of the double shifts she'd been pulling for 3 weeks straight. But exhaustion wasn't a luxury she could afford, not when her younger brother Leo owed $50,000 to a West Side loan shark named Silvio. Working the VIP section at Laura was the only way to earn the kind of tips that could keep Silvio's enforcers away from Leo's apartment. Olivia had survived in this gilded cage by mastering a single crucial skill in visibility. She was a ghost who poured the world's finest spirits. She learned to unhear conversations about rigged union contracts, ignore the sight of briefcases stuffed with unbanded $100 bills, and never ever make eye contact with the men who sat in the velvet-lined booths. Tonight, however, the atmosphere in the club's secluded VIP alcove was suffocating. Sitting at the center table, bathed in the dim golden light of a solitary Edison bulb, was Dominic Rossi. Even among predators, Dominic was the apex. At 32, he had inherited the Rossi syndicate after a car bomb took his father's life 2 years prior. Where his father had been loud and brutally traditional, Dominic was a ghost story, a man educated at Wharton who modernized the family's illicit empire, laundering their blood money through high-end real estate and offshore shell companies. He possessed a terrifying, cold stillness. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that draped flawlessly over his broad shoulders, his dark hair immaculately styled. But it was his eyes that froze people in their tracks. They were a flat, unforgiving obsidian. Across from him sat Arthur Sterling. On paper, Sterling was a legitimate logistics tycoon, a man who controlled the shipping docks. In reality, he was a massive liability, heavily indebted to the Irish factions who had been encroaching on Rossi territory. Olivia watched them from her station, wiping down a spotless counter for the 4th time. There was something inherently wrong with the picture. Sterling was talking too much, his hands moving in erratic, nervous gestures. Dominic, by contrast, hadn't spoken a word in 5 minutes. He merely stared at Sterling, his silence heavier than any threat. "I'm telling you, Dominic, the shipments at the port of Long Beach are secure," Sterling blustered, dabbing his glistening forehead with a silk handkerchief. "The Irish don't have the customs officials in their pocket like we do. It's a temporary setback. A temporary setback that cost me $4 million last Tuesday, Arthur." Dominic's voice was low, smooth, and utterly devoid of warmth. It carried over the low hum of the lounge, slicing through the jazz music, playing softly from the hidden speakers. "We'll recoup it. Tonight is about looking forward," Sterling insisted, forcing a wide, jittery smile. He snapped his fingers toward his towering bodyguard, a man named Griggs, who stood like a stone gargoyle by the velvet rope. "In fact, I brought a peace offering, a gesture of my unwavering loyalty to the Rossi family. Griggs stepped forward carrying a heavily guarded wooden humidor box, but it didn't hold cigars. He opened it to reveal a pristine, dust-covered bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, 23-year family reserve, a bourbon so rare it practically functioned as its own currency in the underworld. "A toast," Sterling announced, his voice cracking slightly, "to our continued prosperity." Olivia's floor manager, a strict woman named Beatrice, shoved a silver serving tray into Olivia's hands. On it rested 2 heavy baccarat crystal tumblers, each containing a single perfectly spherical ice cube. "Take the glasses to table 1. Beatrice hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward Dominic. "And for God's sake, don't linger." Olivia nodded, her heart kicking into a slightly faster rhythm. She hated serving Dominic Rossi. The air around him was always charged with static electricity, a violent potential energy that made her skin prickle. She took a deep breath, plastered on her professional blank expression, and stepped out from the shadows of the service station, gliding silently across the Persian rug toward the lion's den. As Olivia approached the table, she kept her eyes downcast, focusing entirely on the rim of the crystal tumblers. She moved with practiced grace, a ghost weaving through the heavy, tense atmosphere. Sterling's bodyguard, Griggs, intercepted her halfway. "I'll take it from here, sweetheart." Griggs rumbled, his massive hand reaching out to snatch the silver tray. "House policy, sir," Olivia murmured politely, stepping just out of his reach. "Waitstaff must pour the first round for a bottle of this caliber. It's an insurance requirement." It was a lie, of course, but a plausible one at a club like Laura. Griggs glared at her, but Sterling, desperate to maintain the illusion of high society etiquette, waved his man off. "Let the girl do her job, Griggs," Sterling snapped. Olivia approached the mahogany table. She placed the tray down gently. Griggs stepped up beside her to uncork the bottle. As he twisted the cork free, Olivia stood just inches away, her eyes naturally falling to the level of his hands. That was when she saw it. It was a micro-movement, the kind of sleight of hand a street magician would use to palm a coin. But Olivia had grown up watching her father hustle men at underground poker games. Her eyes were trained to catch the flicker of cheating hands. Griggs's thumb dragged across his index finger. Tucked beneath his thick fingernail was a nearly invisible dissolving gel tab. As he tilted the heavy bottle to pour the first splash of bourbon into the tumbler destined for Dominic, his thumb brushed the rim. The tab dropped into the amber liquid, dissolving instantly, without a fizz or a cloud. Chlorine arsenic digitalis. Olivia didn't know the chemical makeup of underworld assassinations, but the sudden ice water flooding her veins told her everything she needed to know. The man across the table was about to be murdered. Right here, right in front of her. Her mind raced at 1,000 miles an hour. Rule number 1 of surviving this world: look away. Mind your own business. If she said something, she'd be injecting herself into a Mafia war. She'd be a witness, a target. Griggs would probably shoot her right there in the club, or worse, Sterling's men would track down her brother Leo. The safest thing to do was to serve the drink walk back to the kitchen and pretend she saw nothing when Dominic Rossi collapsed dead onto the Persian rug. Griggs finished pouring the second glass, this one clean for Sterling. He pushed the poisoned tumbler toward Dominic's side of the table. "To the Rossi family," Sterling repeated, raising his glass, a bead of sweat tracing the curve of his jawline. Dominic's face remained an unreadable mask. He slowly reached out his long fingers, wrapping around the intricately cut crystal of the poisoned tumbler. He didn't look at Sterling. He was looking at the amber liquid, swirling it gently. Olivia's breath hitched in her throat. She looked at Dominic's hands. She remembered a rumor she'd heard from the bartenders that Dominic Rossi secretly funded the entire pediatric oncology ward at Chicago Memorial, insisting his name never appear on the donor plaques. It was a stupid, insignificant rumor, probably a lie to humanize a monster. But as Dominic raised the glass closer to his lips, an overpowering wave of protective adrenaline hijacked her nervous system. She couldn't let a man die on her shift. 3 seconds. Dominic raised the glass. 2 seconds. Sterling's eyes were wide, dilated with manic anticipation. 1 second. Olivia moved. She didn't shout. She didn't point an accusing finger. Instead, she leaned across the table to retrieve her silver tray. As she did, her foot deliberately caught the edge of the heavy table leg. She pitched forward, a controlled fall. Her right forearm slammed into Sterling's chest, knocking him back into the booth with a surprised gasp. Simultaneously, her left hand shot out. In a blindingly fast, fluid motion, a maneuver honed from years of balancing precariously heavy trays through crowded rooms, she bumped Dominic's wrist. The poisoned tumbler slipped from his grip. Before it could crash onto the table, Olivia's hand swooped down, catching the falling glass. With a flick of her wrist, she hurled the contents directly into Sterling's lap. "Oh my God, I am so sorry!" Olivia shrieked instantly, dropping into the role of a terrified, clumsy waitress. But her right hand had already moved. From the hidden pocket of her apron where she always kept a spare, polished glass, just in case she slammed a fresh, empty baccarat tumbler onto the coaster right in front of Dominic. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. "You stupid bitch!" Sterling roared, leaping up from the velvet booth. The expensive bourbon soaked his trousers, clinging to his skin. He raised his hand fully, intending to backhand her across the face. Olivia cringed, bracing for the impact, closing her eyes. The strike never came. A hand, clamped like a steel vice, intercepted Sterling's wrist mid-air. Olivia opened her eyes. Dominic Rossi had risen from his seat. He hadn't just stopped Sterling's hand. He was slowly twisting it, the bone audibly groaning under the pressure. Dominic's obsidian eyes weren't on Sterling, however. They were locked entirely on Olivia. He hadn't missed a single frame of what just happened. He had felt the deliberate precision of her bump. He had seen the unnatural speed with which she removed the danger and replaced the glass. He knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't an accident. "Sit down, Arthur," Dominic said softly. The quietness of his voice was far more terrifying than a scream. He let go of Sterling's wrist, and the shipping magnate collapsed back into the booth, rubbing his arm, his face pale. Dominic slowly picked up the empty glass Olivia had placed before him. He turned it over in his hand. Then he looked at Griggs. "Griggs," Dominic commanded smoothly, "lick the spilled liquor off your boss's pants." The silence that fell over the VIP alcove was absolute. The jazz music seemed to fade into a vacuum. "What?" Sterling choked out his eyes, darting frantically toward the exits. "Dominic!" She spilled the drink. I said. Dominic repeated, his gaze burning a hole through the towering bodyguard. "Lick the bourbon off the fabric. Now." Griggs froze. The color drained from his face entirely. He looked at Sterling, then at Dominic, his hands twitching toward his waistband. That micro-hesitation was all the confirmation Dominic needed. Before Griggs could draw his weapon, Dominic's hand blurred. He snatched a heavy silver candlestick from the center of the table and brought it down with pulverizing force across Griggs's temple. The bodyguard crumpled to the floor instantly, a dead weight. Sterling screamed, scrambling backward over the leather booth. Two of Dominic's men who had been lingering in the shadows near the bar were suddenly there. They grabbed Sterling by the collar, dragging him silently toward the private elevator, reserved for VIP exits. Dominic didn't watch them leave. He pulled a crisp white handkerchief from his breast pocket and methodically wiped the hand that had held the candlestick. He turned back to where Olivia had been standing. But the space was empty. The waitress with the bruised knuckles and the terrifying sleight of hand had vanished into the chaos. Dominic threw the handkerchief onto the table. He looked at Matteo, his towering, scar-faced underboss, who had materialized at his side. "Lock down the building." Dominic ordered, his voice vibrating with a dark, dangerous intrigue. "Find the waitress. Bring her to the estate, undamaged." Olivia didn't bother clocking out. The moment Dominic had grabbed Sterling's wrist, she had backed away into the shadows, slipping through the swinging doors of the kitchen. She bypassed the locker room, entirely grabbing her threadbare denim jacket from a hook near the dish pit. She burst through the heavy steel fire exit into the freezing Chicago night air. Her lungs burned as she sprinted down the rain-slicked alleyway, the sounds of Michigan Avenue traffic roaring in the distance, like an ocean she needed to reach. Run! That was the only word echoing in her skull. She had exposed an assassination attempt on the head of the Rossi syndicate. The Irish would want her dead for ruining the hit. The Rossis would want her dead for knowing too much. She turned the corner onto Erie Street, fumbling in her pocket for her subway pass. A sleek, black Maybach silently rolled to a stop, blocking the crosswalk. Before she could pivot and run the other way, the rear door swung open. A massive silhouette stepped out into the glow of the street lamp. It was Matteo Dominic's shadow. He didn't pull a gun. He didn't need to. He simply pointed to the open door of the vehicle. "Get in, Miss Bennett," Matteo said. His tone wasn't a request. It was a fact of gravity. Olivia's heart plummeted. They already knew her name. They had probably accessed her employee file the second she ran. Knowing she couldn't outrun a bullet, and utterly terrified that they might redirect their attention to her brother if she vanished, Olivia swallowed her pride and climbed into the plush, leather-scented interior of the Maybach. The drive was agonizingly silent. 30 minutes later, the car passed through heavy wrought-iron gates, pulling up to a sprawling, fortress-like estate in Lake Forest. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with restless attack dogs. She was escorted inside, marched across echoing marble floors, and led into a massive, dimly lit library that smelled of old paper and leather. The doors clicked shut behind her, locking her in. She stood in the center of the room, shivering in her thin jacket. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The psychological torture of waiting was worse than a physical threat. Finally, the heavy oak doors opened. Dominic Rossi stepped into the room. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the faint edge of a dark tattoo on his collarbone. Without the armor of his suit, he looked less like a boardroom executive and more like the lethal street soldier he had been raised to be. He didn't speak immediately. He walked over to a crystal decanter, resting on a mahogany desk, poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, checking the glass meticulously first, and took a slow sip. He leaned against the edge of the desk, crossing his ankles, and simply stared at her. Under the intense scrutiny of his obsidian eyes, Olivia felt entirely exposed. She crossed her arms, refusing to break eye contact, trying to hide the violent trembling of her hands. "Who do you work for?" Dominic finally asked. His voice was a soft, deadly murmur. "Laura Lounge," Olivia replied, her voice raspy. "At least I did until about 40 minutes ago." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me, Olivia. Sterling was a mule. He didn't have the brains to organize a poisoned drop. And he certainly didn't have the finesse to plant an operative inside my club to save me, just to build trust." He pushed off the desk, stalking slowly toward her like a panther cornering its prey. "So I'll ask you again. Are you working for the Montgomery family? Did Alec Montgomery send you to fake a rescue so I'd bring you into my inner circle?" Olivia stared at him, genuinely bewildered. "Alec Montgomery? I don't even know who that is. I serve drinks, Mr. Rossi. That's it." Dominic stopped just 2 feet away from her. The height difference was intimidating. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. He reached out his warm, calloused fingers, suddenly wrapping around her right wrist. He lifted her hand between them. "A waitress who serves drinks?" He murmured his thumb, brushing over the raw, purple bruises, dusting her knuckles. "Where did you learn to move your hands like a grifter?" "And who bruised you?" Olivia tried to yank her hand back, but his grip was unyielding. "I tripped," she lied, her cheeks burning. The bruises were from Silvio's men. She had punched one of them in the jaw when they showed up at her brother's apartment 3 days ago. "You're a terrible liar," Dominic observed quietly. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. The scent of his cologne, rich and spicy, wrapped around her. "You saw the drop. You saw Griggs poison the glass. Instead of walking away, you intervened. You executed a flawless swap." "Why?" "I tripped," she stubbornly repeated, glaring up at him. Dominic's eyes darkened. The air in the room grew unspeakably tense. "A man tried to murder me tonight. I am not in a charitable mood. Tell me the truth, Olivia, or I will have Matteo extract it from you in the basement." The threat hung in the air, heavy and violent. Olivia's stubbornness finally fractured under the weight of her sheer exhaustion and terror. "Because I didn't want to watch another person die," she snapped, her voice, cracking tears of frustration, finally brimming in her eyes. "Okay. Is that what you want to hear?" I saw him palm the vial. I knew what it was, and I knew if I let you drink it, I'd have your dead eyes staring at me in my nightmares for the rest of my life. So I swapped the glass. I saved your miserable, ungrateful life. And my reward is being kidnapped and accused of being a Mafia spy. She yanked her wrist again, and this time Dominic let her go. She stumbled back, wiping furiously at her eyes, angry at herself for crying. Dominic stood frozen, staring at her. The cold, calculated mask he wore for the world had slipped just a fraction. He looked at the fire blazing in the hearth, then back at her fiercely defiant face. In his world, everyone wanted something. Everyone had an angle. The concept of someone risking their life purely out of a raw human instinct to protect another was utterly foreign to him. "You have no idea what you've done," Dominic said, his voice stripped of its earlier menace, replaced by a quiet, profound realization. "I know I lost my job," Olivia shot back, wrapping her arms around herself. "And I know that without those tips, my brother and I are dead anyway." Dominic tilted his head, his eyes narrowing sharply at the mention of her brother. He walked back to his desk and picked up a manila folder, flipping it open. "Leo Bennett," Dominic read aloud. 22. A gambling addiction. Into Silvio for 50 grand. That's who gave you the bruises, isn't it, Silvio's enforcers? Olivia's stomach plummeted to the floor. How? How do you know that? "I run this city, Olivia," Dominic said, simply closing the folder. "I know everything. Silvio operates in my territory, which means Silvio answers to me." He walked back over to her, his demeanor shifting entirely. "The predator was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, a protector. You saved my life tonight," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register that made a shiver run down Olivia's spine. "In the Rossi family, a debt of blood is absolute. Your brother's debt to Silvio is forgiven. As of 10 minutes ago, it no longer exists." Olivia gasped, her knees turning weak. $50,000. The nightmare that had haunted her for months, erased with a single sentence. You paid it." "I didn't say I paid it. I said it no longer exists," Dominic corrected softly. A dark, ruthless smile touched the corner of his lips. "Silvio was very understanding when Matteo called him. He reached out and, to Olivia's shock, his hand gently brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was burning hot against her cold skin. "But that leaves another problem," Dominic murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips before meeting her gaze again. "You exposed a Montgomery plot. Alec Montgomery will know you ruined his assassination attempt. The second you walk out of these gates, his men will hunt you down." "So what am I supposed to do?" Olivia whispered, her heart hammering wildly, caught in the hypnotic snare of his gaze. Dominic stepped closer, his chest almost brushing hers. "You stay here, with me, under my protection. You belong to the Rossi Syndicate now." Morning arrived not with the blare of street sweepers on her cramped West Side block, but with the silent, creeping sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Olivia woke with a violent start, the memories of the previous night crashing over her like a freezing wave. The poisoned baccarat glass, Griggs's crumpled body, the lethal obsidian gaze of Dominic Rossi. She pushed herself up her hands, sinking into the cloud-like softness of fret cotton linens. She was in a master guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. The walls were painted a soothing muted slate, adorned with what looked like original Rothko sketches. Through the double doors, a marble-clad bathroom beckoned, stocked with unopened jars of La Mer and Joe Malone bath oils. It was a breathtaking sanctuary. It was also a maximum security prison. Olivia swung her legs over the edge of the California king bed. Someone had placed a fresh set of clothes at the foot of the mattress, a pair of cashmere sweatpants, and a cream-colored Brunello Cucinelli knit sweater that cost more than her annual rent. She dressed mechanically, the soft fabric feeling foreign against skin accustomed to polyester uniforms and thrift store denim. When she stepped out of the bedroom, she found the estate's upper corridor eerily quiet. Downstairs, the atmosphere shifted. The sprawling, open-concept kitchen, anchored by a massive Sub-Zero refrigerator and an imported La Cornue range, was bustling, but not with chefs. 4 men in dark tactical gear were gathered around the granite island, dismantling and cleaning an array of matte black firearms. The metallic clack slide of a Glock 19 being reassembled made Olivia freeze on the bottom step. Matteo, the towering underboss, looked up. His heavily scarred face broke into a shockingly polite, if rigid, smile. "Good morning, Miss Bennett. There is espresso in the machine, and Maria made sfogliatelle." "Thank you," Olivia stammered, wrapping her arms around herself. She kept a wide berth from the weapons, moving toward the espresso machine. "Where is—" "The boss is in his study," Matteo answered smoothly, anticipating the question. He reached into his leather jacket and withdrew a sleek black iPhone, sliding it across the marble counter. "He also instructed me to give you this. It's fully encrypted, bounces off 3 different cell towers before connecting. You have 5 minutes to call your brother." Olivia's breath hitched. She snatched the phone with trembling hands. "Leo, I had my men do a drive-by of his apartment complex an hour ago." Matteo noted his tone strictly business. "Silvio's collectors have vanished. Your brother is safe, but he is confused. Tell him you got a sudden high-paying private catering gig out of state. Tell him nothing else." Olivia nodded frantically, retreating to the corner of the kitchen. She dialed Leo's number from memory. He answered on the first ring, his voice frantic, babbling about how his debt had miraculously been zeroed out by a terrifying man in a tailored suit. Olivia choked back a sob, feeding him the lie Matteo had constructed. Hearing her younger brother's voice, alive, unbruised, and free of the crushing weight of the loan sharks, sent a wave of profound, complicated gratitude washing over her. Dominic Rossi was a ruthless criminal, but he had kept his word. When she ended the call, she turned to find the kitchen empty of the guards. Matteo gestured toward the hallway leading to the west wing. "He wants to see you." Olivia walked down the long, oak-paneled corridor, her heart resuming its frantic rhythm. The heavy doors to Dominic's study were ajar. She stepped inside. Dominic was standing by a massive bay window, staring out at the rolling, manicured lawns of the Lake Forest estate, which sloped down toward the icy grey expanse of Lake Michigan. He was wearing a fitted black turtleneck and dark trousers, looking every inch the modern patrician, a stark contrast to the violence he commanded. "Did you speak to him?" Dominic asked, not turning around. "Yes," Olivia said softly. "Thank you. Truly. I don't know how I could ever—" "Don't thank me yet," Dominic interrupted, turning to face her. His eyes were dark, shadowed by a sleepless night. He walked over to his mahogany desk and picked up a glossy 8x10 photograph, tossing it onto the leather blotter. Arthur Sterling was found dead this morning. His yacht docked at Belmont Harbor, 2 bullets to the back of the head. The police are calling it a suicide. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. She stared at the photo, her stomach violently twisting. "But you let him go last night." "I did," Dominic said, stepping closer to her, his voice dropping to a dangerous murmur. "Because I wanted to track where he ran. I wanted to see which of Alec Montgomery's lieutenants he panicked and called. But Montgomery is thorough. He cleaned up his mess before the sun came up." Dominic stopped just inches from her. The proximity was intoxicating and terrifying. Sterling was the distraction. Griggs, the bodyguard with the poison, was the weapon. Both are dead. "Do you understand what that means, Olivia?" She looked up into his obsidian eyes, the reality settling over her like a suffocating blanket. "I'm the only one left. I'm the only living witness to the drop." "Exactly," Dominic breathed. He reached out his knuckles, lightly grazing her cheek. The contrast of his gentle touch against the brutal reality of their conversation sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. "Montgomery knows the hit failed, and he has men inside the Chicago Police Department. By noon, he will have pulled the security footage from Laura. He will see a waitress with brown hair bump my arm and swap my glass. He will know you saved the Rossi Empire, and he will want to mount your head on his wall." Olivia trembled, not stepping away from his touch. "So I stay in this house forever?" "No," Dominic said, his jaw tightening. "If I hide you away, it signals to the 5 families that I am afraid. It signals weakness. And in my world, weakness is a death sentence. We go on the offensive. And we do it tonight." The air in the master suite was thick with the scent of hairspray and expensive perfume. 2 women flown in from a private styling agency in New York fluttered around Olivia like anxious birds. Dominic's strategy was as reckless as it was brilliant utter defiance. Tonight was the annual Benefactors Gala at the Field Museum of Natural History, a high society event where Chicago's political elite mingled with its most powerful, quietly corrupt billionaires. Dominic Rossi always attended. To skip it after an assassination attempt would confirm he was rattled. To attend with the very woman who saved him, hidden in plain sight, as his date was a massive flex of dominance. Olivia stared at her reflection in the floor-to-length antique mirror. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. The stylists had poured her into a custom midnight blue silk gown that clung to her curves like a second skin, featuring a dangerously low cowl back. Her dark hair was swept up into an elegant, intricate twist, exposing her long neck. But it was the jewelry that made her knees weak. Resting against her collarbone was a vintage Cartier diamond choker, so heavy and brilliant it felt like wearing a constellation. The heavy bedroom doors clicked open. The stylists immediately fell silent and stepped back. Dominic walked in. He was wearing a classic tuxedo, the midnight black fabric absorbing the light, his bow tie perfectly knotted. He looked lethal. He looked immaculate. He stopped a few feet away, his obsidian eyes sweeping slowly from the hem of her gown to the diamonds at her throat, and finally to her wide, nervous eyes. For a long, suspended moment, the cold, calculating Mafia boss vanished. The raw hunger in his gaze was so intense it made Olivia's breath catch in her throat. "You look exactly as you should," Dominic murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Like you belong to me." He stepped forward, offering his arm. "Ready to step into the shark tank, Miss Bennett." "As long as you promise not to let me get eaten," Olivia replied, forcing a weak smile as she slipped her arm through his. The solid, warm muscle beneath his tuxedo jacket grounded her. "Anyone who looks at you too long tonight," Dominic whispered against her ear as they walked toward the stairs, "loses their eyes. You have my word." 30 minutes later, the armored Maybach pulled up to the grand limestone columns of the Field Museum. The flash of paparazzi cameras strobed like lightning through the tinted windows. "Keep your chin up. Do not look away from the cameras," Dominic instructed quietly, his demeanor instantly shifting into the untouchable billionaire. Matteo opened the door. Dominic stepped out first, smoothly buttoning his jacket, before turning and offering his hand to Olivia. The moment her silver stiletto hit the red carpet, the crowd roared. She gripped Dominic's hand like a lifeline, projecting a haughty, detached confidence she absolutely didn't feel. Inside the museum had been transformed. The massive Stanley Field Hall, shadowed by the towering skeleton of a titanosaur, was filled with tables draped in white silk. Waiters carried trays of champagne. It was a beautiful facade hiding a nest of vipers. As Dominic guided her through the crowd, the sea of elite attendees parted for him. Dominic was a king holding court, and by extension, she was a queen. "Dominic, you survived the week. How delightful." The voice sliced through the ambient chatter like a straight razor. Olivia felt Dominic's arm instantly turn to granite beneath her hands. They turned around. Standing near the base of an elephant exhibit was Alec Montgomery. He didn't look like a mob boss. He looked like a third-generation Yale graduate. He wore a navy tuxedo, his blonde hair immaculately parted, holding a crystal glass of champagne. He smiled, but the expression didn't reach his pale, icy blue eyes. Flanking him were 4 broad-shouldered, dead-eyed enforcers. "Alec," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm, devoid of any inflection. "I heard about Arthur Sterling's tragic accident this morning. Such a shame. He was always so careless with his toys." Alec chuckled, taking a slow sip of his champagne. "Indeed. The city is a dangerous place, Dominic. People slip, people fall, people drink things they shouldn't." Alec's icy gaze drifted from Dominic to Olivia. He scanned her up and down, lingering on the Cartier diamonds, before his eyes locked onto hers. The malicious knowing glint in his pupils made her blood run cold. "And who is this stunning creature?" Alec asked, stepping half a pace closer. "I must say, Dominic, your taste is usually so predictable. But she has fire. I feel like I've seen her somewhere before, perhaps serving drinks in a dimly lit room." Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "He knows." Dominic shifted slightly, placing himself half an inch in front of Olivia, blocking Alec's direct line of sight. "My date's identity is not a concern of yours, Alec." Dominic warned, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees. "But I would strongly advise you to keep your eyes to yourself, or I will blind you here in front of the mayor." Alec's smile finally vanished. The mask of civility slipped, revealing the rabid dog beneath. "You're getting arrogant, Rossi. You dodged a bullet last night, but you're not immortal. Your borders are weak. The Irish are bleeding your ports dry. You're holding on to an empire built by your father, and it's slipping through your fingers." If it's slipping, Dominic countered smoothly, stepping into Alec's personal space. Why did you have to hire a bumbling shipping magnate to do your dirty work? You're a coward, Alec. The tension snapped tight. Alec's enforcers subtly shifted their weight, their hands drifting toward their lapels. Behind Dominic, Matteo and 3 of Rossi's men materialized out of the crowd, equally ready. A shootout in the middle of a high society gala was imminent. Suddenly, a loud, sharp ringing echoed through the hall. Alec pulled a vibrating phone from his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and his pale eyes widened fractionally. He looked back up at Dominic, a vein pulsing in his temple. It seems we'll have to finish this conversation later, Alec sneered, pocketing the phone. He looked at Olivia one last time. Watch your back, sweetheart. Beautiful things break so easily in this city. Alec turned on his heel, his men forming a wedge as he stormed out of the grand hall. Dominic watched him leave, his chest rising and falling, with controlled, furious breaths. He turned to Matteo, who was already holding a glowing earpiece to his ear. "Boss!" Matteo said, his voice tight. "That was our guys at the Southside port. Montgomery wasn't here just to gloat. He was keeping you distracted." "What happened?" Dominic demanded. While we were talking to him, the Irish hit the primary warehouse. They blew the doors off. They stole the shipment, Dominic. All of it. Dominic closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, the fury was absolute. The Cold War was over. The streets were about to run red. He looked down at Olivia, his grip tightening protectively on her hand. "The gala is over," he said grimly. "We're going to war." The gates of the Lake Forest estate didn't just open. They were flanked by 2 black SUVs, their high beams cutting through the fog. Men armed with military-grade tactical rifles patrolled the perimeter. The manor had been transformed into a war room. As they stepped into the grand foyer, Matteo was waiting. He had shed his suit jacket, a Kevlar vest strapped tightly over his dress shirt. Maps of the Southside rail yards and shipping manifests were sprawled across the antique mahogany dining table. The Irish faction, led by Declan Fitzpatrick, hit Warehouse 4. Matteo reported, his voice grim. "They bypassed the biometric locks. Someone gave them the master codes, Dominic. Montgomery orchestrated the gala distraction, but the Irish had inside help. We lost 50 million in untraceable bearer bonds and arms." Dominic threw his tuxedo jacket over a chair and rolled up his sleeves, his eyes scanning the blueprints. Montgomery and Fitzpatrick, old money and street thugs working together. It's an unholy alliance. How did they get the codes? "We're interrogating the surviving guards now," Matteo said, his scarred face hardening. "But whoever the mole is, they're high up." Olivia stood in the archway of the dining room, her midnight blue silk gown starkly out of place against the backdrop of body armor and blueprints. She felt a sickening knot twist in her stomach. She closed her eyes, forcing her mind back to the dimly lit VIP alcove at Laura. She thought about Arthur Sterling, sweating, babbling to fill the silence before the poisoned drink was poured. What had he said? "I'm telling you, Dominic, the shipments at the port of Long Beach are secure. The Irish don't have the customs officials in their pocket like we do. It's a temporary setback." But then, just before the drink was poured, Sterling had leaned in. He had muttered something else to his bodyguard Griggs, something Olivia had overheard while wiping down the service station. Olivia stepped into the room. It wasn't a guard. Dominic and Matteo both turned their intense gazes, locking on to her. "Olivia, you shouldn't be down here," Dominic said, his voice softening just a fraction, though the lethal edge remained. "Matteo, have 2 men escort Miss Bennet to the secure vault suite." "Listen to me," Olivia interrupted, her voice trembling but gaining strength as she walked toward the table. She pointed a manicured finger at the map of the South Side. Sterling didn't just bring you a poisoned bottle of bourbon to earn your trust. He was tying up loose ends. Before he offered the toast, he told Griggs to confirm the transfer with a man named Kavanagh at Kensington Wealth Partners. Dominic froze. The air in the room seemed to evaporate. Matteo swore softly in Italian. Kensington Wealth. They manage the pension funds for the dock workers' union. Sterling was the mole. Olivia continued, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was drowning in debt. Montgomery and Fitzpatrick didn't just pay off his loans, they bought his access. Sterling used his logistics company to move your goods, which means he had your warehouse codes. He gave the Irish the keys to the kingdom, and Montgomery gave Sterling the poison to take you out so you couldn't retaliate. Dominic stared at her, his obsidian eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and profound realization. She hadn't just saved his life with a sleight of hand. She had just handed him the blueprint to his enemy's entire operation. Matteo! Dominic whispered, a dark, terrifying smile slowly spreading across his face. Get our forensic accountants on the line. I want every dime flowing into Kensington Wealth Partners, frozen, traced, and drained by dawn. We aren't going to shoot our way out of this. We are going to bankrupt them. Matteo nodded sharply, grabbing his radio. And the Irish, if Fitzpatrick wants to act like a pirate, we'll treat him like one, Dominic said, coldly. Arm the men. We're going to the Midway private hangars. Montgomery won't stay in the city after stealing from me. He'll try to fly out. Dominic turned fully toward Olivia. The manic energy of the war room faded into the background. He closed the distance between them, his hands reaching out to gently cup her face. His thumbs traced the high crests of her cheekbones. You are extraordinary, he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion that bordered on reverence. I brought you here to protect you, but you just saved my empire. Come back alive, Olivia whispered, her hands gripping the lapels of his holstered vest. It wasn't a request, it was a plea. She had spent her entire life trying to survive the monsters of Chicago, and now she found herself terrifyingly in love with the king of them all. Dominic leaned down, his lips crashing against hers in a searing, desperate kiss. It tasted of expensive champagne, adrenaline, and the promise of violence. When he pulled away, his eyes burned with a fierce, possessive fire. Lock the doors, Dominic ordered the remaining guards. If anyone other than me tries to enter this house, kill them. Rain lashed against the corrugated steel of the Signature Flight Support private terminal at Chicago Midway International Airport. On the tarmac, a sleek Gulfstream G65 sat with its engines whining, preparing for an emergency takeoff. Inside the hangar, Alec Montgomery was pacing furiously, surrounded by a dozen heavily armed men, including Declan Fitzpatrick, the fiery-haired leader of the Irish faction. They were watching a series of encrypted laptops, waiting for the $50 million in bearer bonds to be verified and transferred into their offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The Rossi syndicate is bleeding, Alec gloated, checking his diamond-studded Rolex. Dominic is probably tearing apart the South Side looking for ghosts. By the time he realizes we're gone, we'll be untraceable. Transfer is initiating, one of the hackers called out from the desk. Connecting to Kensington Wealth Partners routing servers. Wait. The hacker's fingers flew across the keyboard, panic suddenly bleeding into his posture. Sir, access denied. The routing codes are dead. Alec stopped pacing. What do you mean, dead? Reroute it. I can't. The accounts, they're gone. The hacker stammered, his face turning paper white. Not just the Rossi bonds, all of it. The Kensington Central Fund has been liquidated. The money was wired to a blind trust in Zurich 10 minutes ago. Declan Fitzpatrick grabbed the hacker by the collar, lifting him out of the chair. What are you talking about? Where is my money? Before the hacker could answer, the massive steel doors of the hangar didn't just open. They blew inward with a deafening concussive blast. Smoke and rain poured into the brightly lit hangar. Through the haze, a dozen laser sights cut through the dark, instantly painting Alec, Declan and their men in a matrix of red dots. Dominic's strike team poured in with terrifying synchronized precision, disarming the Irish thugs before they even had time to raise their weapons. Dominic Rossi walked through the smoke, untouched, immaculate, and utterly lethal. He held a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol at his side, though he didn't bother raising it. He didn't need to. He had already won. "Going somewhere, Alec?" Dominic asked, his voice echoing off the aluminum walls. Alec stared in horror, his aristocratic composure shattering into a million pieces. How did you find us?" The money is gone, Alec," Dominic said, calmly, stopping 10 feet away. "Your shell companies are bankrupt. The feds have just received an anonymous, fully documented data dump of your entire embezzlement scheme at the port. You are penniless, and by sunrise, you will be the most wanted man in America." Declan Fitzpatrick snarled, reaching for an ankle holster. A single shot rang out. Declan screamed, collapsing to the concrete floor, clutching his shattered kneecap. Matteo stood to Dominic's right, smoke curling lazily from the barrel of his rifle. "I don't kill men in front of an audience, Alec. It's bad for business," Dominic said, looking down at his defeated rival with absolute disgust. "But you have nothing left to offer this city. The Irish territory belongs to the Rossis now. You can board that plane and spend the rest of your pathetic life running from the FBI, or you can stay here and bleed out with Declan. The choice is yours." Dominic turned his back on them, the ultimate display of disrespect, and walked out into the rain. The war was over. The checkmate was absolute. The sun was just beginning to peek over the icy expanse of Lake Michigan, casting long golden shadows across the lawn of the Rossi estate. Olivia sat on the edge of the master bed, still wearing the midnight blue gown, though the Cartier necklace rested on the nightstand. She hadn't slept a wink. When she heard the heavy footsteps ascending the oak staircase, her breath hitched. The door opened, and Dominic stepped inside. He smelled of rain, gunpowder, and exhaustion. He locked the door behind him and walked slowly toward her. He didn't say a word about the bloodless coup at the airport. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the mattress beside her. "What is this?" Olivia asked, her voice raspy. "A new life," Dominic said quietly, sitting in the velvet armchair across from the bed, watching her intently. "There is a pristine passport in there, a new identity, and a bank book for a Credit Suisse account with $10 million in clean, untraceable funds. Your brother's name is on a matching account." Olivia stared at the envelope. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. Freedom, safety, an escape from the grinding poverty and fear that had defined her existence. "Alec Montgomery is ruined. The Irish are broken. No one will ever look for you." Dominic continued his voice, tight, suppressing the violent urge to rip the envelope away from her. "You saved me, Olivia. Twice. My debt to you is paid. You can walk out of those gates right now, and you will never see the dark side of this world again." Olivia slowly picked up the envelope. It was heavy. It represented a normal life. She looked at Dominic. He was the most dangerous man in Chicago. He lived in a world of shadows, violence, and constant paranoia, but he was also the man who had erased her brother's debt without hesitation, who had shielded her from the monsters of the city, and who looked at her not as a waitress, but as an equal. With a slow, deliberate motion, Olivia gripped the edges of the thick manila envelope. Rape. She tore it in half, then in quarters. She let the pieces flutter to the Persian rug like dead leaves. Dominic's breath caught in his chest. He surged out of the chair, crossing the room in 2 long strides. He knelt in front of her, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her flush against him. "Do you understand what you're choosing?" Dominic demanded, his voice a raw, desperate whisper. "If you stay in this house, you belong to the syndicate. You belong to me. There is no walking away. Ever." Olivia wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her fingers in his dark hair. The scared waitress who had worked double shifts to pay off loan sharks was dead. In her place sat the new queen of the Chicago underworld. "I'm not running, Dominic," she whispered fiercely against his lips. "I'm exactly where I belong." If this story of high-stakes betrayal, ruthless mafia power, and the unexpected love that conquered the Chicago underworld kept you on the edge of your seat, you are not alone. Olivia went from an invisible waitress to the queen of the Rossi Syndicate in just 48 hours, proving that sometimes the sharpest minds aren't in the boardroom, they're serving the drinks. Dominic's Wharton-educated ruthlessness met its match in her street-smart survival skills, creating an unstoppable empire. What did you think of the ultimate twist at the airport? Was Dominic right to bankrupt Alec Montgomery instead of taking him out the old-fashioned way? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more intense, real-life-inspired drama and romance stories full of unexpected twists, make sure to smash that like button, share this with your fellow suspense lovers, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a thrilling episode.